Well, good morning to sunny Cheltenham. This is the HEPI UCAS annual webinar, which always takes place just a little bit before the big results day in England and Wales, which is taking place on Thursday. I'm sitting in UCAS HQ with Jo Saxton, the CEO of UCAS. And this morning's webinar, which will only last 45 minutes, and we're going to cram a lot in, is going to be divvied up into three sections. First, I'm going to put a few top of the agenda questions to Jo about this year's admissions round and results day. Then we'll have a very, very, very quick break where we slightly reorganise the studio, where we bring in, after that, Maggie Smart, the head of data here at UCAS, and Ben Jordan, who leads on policy, and with Jo, and we'll put a few more questions to the three of them. And then there'll be an opportunity for you, the audience, to pose anything you like to Ben, Maggie and Jo. We will take the questions in the order in which they are upvoted. So vote for other people's questions if you want those questions to be asked. And please use the Q&A function for that, not the chat function. One other tiny bit of housekeeping. This is entirely on the record, this event. There are journalists listening in, and I hope that won't stop anybody from saying or asking what they want to ask, but just remember that. So with no further ado, Jo, thanks for being so open and willing to talk 2 days before the big results day, though we've already, of course, had results here in Scotland, yes, within the UK, and of course international applicants and what have you may well have results and mature students and what have you. How's it all looking? 2 days to go until the really big results day.
Our preparations are on track. We've had a successful results day for Scotland, which is always a really good indicator. And as you'll be aware, this is my second as the UCAS chief executive. So I'm still new enough that I think of everything through the lens of being a school leader. And when I think about this cycle, the thing that I'm most I suppose grateful of is, I remember so clearly as a school leader when it was brought to my attention that the 18-year-old population was growing so significantly, and we used to really worry that there would be a real squeeze on university places for this cohort. So I'm really delighted to see that the record interest from 18-year-olds is being met from universities in their response.
So record interest, and I think I'm right in saying a lot of people are expecting record proportions getting their first choice place. First choice being probably their firm offer. Is that what you're expecting?
Well, I think history shows us that the majority of applicants wake up having achieved their firm or UCAS first choice on results day. At the moment, there's no indications that anything else would happen. But in particular, that record number of UK 18-year-old applicants, over 300,000, has been met with record offer making by the sector, and that's the bit that just really pleases me.
Yeah, and some people think that this is the first truly post-COVID admissions round we've had, because this cohort of school leavers did have some of their secondary schooling disrupted by COVID, but it was essentially in sort of years 7 and 8 and 9 maybe, but their GCSEs were pretty normal, their A-levels were pretty normal. Is that fair to say this is the first sort of properly post-COVID generation of school leavers?
Well, I think in many ways, I'm not sure anything is normal post-COVID, is it really? But I mean, obviously, I was chief regulator during that time where external exams were reinstated, and I led the work to tackle grade inflation in England. So it's something that I feel very personally. So you're right that this cohort are the first to sit their level 3 qualifications where they had the pre-pandemic standard reinstated on their GCSEs. And I think that's just such an important backdrop to this whole cycle, just remembering this is that cohort, that there was a significant national programme to deflate their grades, and it was something I lost a lot of sleep over. And I talked to teenagers up and down the country before I did it. They really wanted their exams back, and they wanted their results to carry value in perpetuity. So, I think they will really be looking to those universities to respect and understand the context in which they've come through.
So one academic who's always all over the media at this time of year is Alan Smithers, who's an education academic at University of Buckingham, who always tries to predict what the results are going to be. And obviously you can't tell us, even though UCAS and universities have those results already. But he is worried that there is sort of some grade inflation now bedded into the system, and that we haven't actually returned quite to the pre-COVID level of top grades. And he's sort of saying there's a new normal where it's a slightly higher percentage of people getting those very top grades, and even warning that could be, that could get worse again. Is that something that worries you? You think about? Certainly university admissions officers.
I have to remember here that I'm no longer the chief regulator, so I have to think with, from the UCAS perspective. Again, I think I would draw you back to that cohort and what they went through with their GCSEs, because the practical consequence of that is that it did mean that fewer students than in recent years actually met the entry criteria that most schools and colleges would set for progression into A-level subjects. So you can see in the data it's a slightly smaller A-level cohort than we've seen for a while, particularly in contrast to the size of the 18-year-old population. So what does that probably, it probably means that there's a fractionally higher prior attainment across the cohort. This is me speculating as a former chief regulator. But I think the important point to remember, really, apart from the context of this cohort, is every year there are commentators who speculate and predict what might happen, and sometimes they are really accurate and sometimes they're not. And so I think until the results come through,
if you make enough predictions, something
really,
will.
Yeah, I mean,
broken clocks right twice a day, they say, don't they?
The bit that really is so important, a huge part of my job at this time of year, and this is one of the things that I quite often talk with vice chancellors about. Of course, the sector's facing all sorts of issues, but my concern at this time of year is to make sure that applicants and their parents and carers, particularly those where university isn't something normal in their background, feel confident about what's going to happen to them this week, and that it is a brilliant thing to do to invest in your future and go to university.
And one thing that does seem to have changed, though again people are using the phrase new normal about it, is the role of clearing in the system. I mean, people my age, there was a little bit of stigma attached to clearing. It was what you did if your A-levels hadn't gone the way you wanted, and maybe you'd end up at a university you weren't so happy to be at. But now it just seems that it's almost completely normal part of the system. Large number of people getting places in clearing, sometimes people going to more selective institutions through clearing, tens of thousands of courses available. Is that an accurate description? What's your view?
I think you're right. There is a new normal. I'm trying to think what's a polite way to describe the people like you and me who, for whom when we were applying, clearing maybe was perceived as a bargain basement. It was for the people who had been unsuccessful. But for that is definitely not how current applicants perceive it. For current applicants, it's the mechanism by which they change their mind. And what we see very clearly in the data is, it's not the stereotypes that you've just suggested of trading up. The majority of students in clearing, in fact, half of all students taking a place in clearing, are going back to one of their original 5 choices. And half of those, again, so a quarter of all of them, are going back to a specific course of a specific institution. And there are just as many
that would have
students,
turned them down first time round, or that
they didn't accept for whatever reason.
Yeah. So
but when we talk to students about why they're why are they making those choices, it ranges from I want to be closer to home, to I've got caring responsibilities, to I've changed my mind about my course. But I think the thing that's really important is that clearing is not it can be, I think it's a misrepresentation to suggest that it's a trading up activity. Right. It is about students trusting their instincts and going back to their kind of curated playlists, the favourites that they researched, that they've probably visited.
Following their heart and finding the right.
They're not blindfolded, throwing a dart at a dartboard. It's researched.
I mean, there are still consequences, of course, getting a place quite late in the round. For example, finding student accommodation can be much tougher. So I guess people need to do it with their eyes open. But
it can be. But again, I think the HESA data shows that students who accept in clearing are actually statistically slightly more likely to turn up and enrol than main scheme applicants.
Interesting. Financial crisis of universities. I mean, every single day you open a newspaper and you hear about how universities are underfunded and they're struggling financially, and 72% are predicted to be in deficit in 2025, 2026. Is there any relationship, should there be any relationship between the financial position of universities and people's applicant behaviour? Should applicants be worried about the financial state of universities?
Well, that's certainly not something that we're seeing. Obviously, we talk to applicants all the time, formally and informally, and the concern about that is not coming through from students. Concern about cost of living whilst they study, that definitely comes through as something that students are concerned about.
Yeah, and we did a report, HEPI, as you know, on the cost of living crisis among students today. And just my final question before we bring in Maggie and Ben, do you think, you said earlier on that demand for higher education is not as high as we expected it to be a few years ago, given there's more 18-year-olds coming out of school? Do you think that is because partly the cost of living crisis affecting students? Maybe dropout rates don't seem to have gone up, but maybe people just aren't applying in the first place to the degree that we were originally expecting.
Well, Maggie is the real expert on this, but I think if you put 18-year-olds and 19-year-old applicants together, we're not sure that there is, there's not a great drop-off. If anything, what we can see at the moment is a plateauing of the interest in 18-year-olds. But also, as I said at the beginning, it's a numerical record in terms of those 18-year-old applicants, so we don't see any dampening amongst them at the moment.
Great, well, thank you, Jo. So, as I say, this webinar is in 3 parts. So the next part, we're going to have just a 30-second break while we rearrange the chairs, bring in Maggie and Ben, and then we'll put some further questions to them. Keep your questions coming in, because we'll put those to all 3 of them after that. Thank you. Welcome back. So we've slightly rearranged the room and Jo is still here, but I'm absolutely delighted that we've also got Maggie Smart, whose job title is Director of Data and really knows the numbers, as Jo was suggesting there, and also Ben Jordan, Director of Strategy, who many of you would have seen some of his anecdotes about being a student in the newspapers at the weekend. So let's go, Maggie, first to you. Can we pick up where we were a moment ago with Jo, sort of on this year's trends, 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds. At the end of this cycle, when the dust has settled, will there be more students, more new students this year than last year? And what will that look like as a percentage of the sort of young cohort?
Yeah, so really interesting to draw that distinction. I think when we're looking at the proportion of the cohort, that I'll come back to that because I think it's a little bit too close to call at the moment. In terms of absolute numbers, I'm reasonably confident, with following wind and everything being as it should be, that we should see an increase in the school leaver cohort entering higher education this year. But we know that that's partly driven by the size of that cohort, so the population increases that we've been seeing for the last few years, and also that really active offer making that universities and colleges have been making this year, which will have given those young people much greater choice to get to the place that they want to be. When we kind of do our extrapolations based on all the experience that I've got, I would say that by the end of the cycle, we're probably looking at relatively flat in terms of the proportion. And that's a difference from last year where we actually saw an increase in the entry rate. What we have seen as very different is in applications, so demand. So that's probably the point that kind of we've been looking at in more detail. If you take a very long view, we saw a very, very year-to-year predictable increase in the proportion of UK 18-year-olds that were applying to UCAS for higher education. Apart from a few notable years where policy changes, system changes meant that deviated, it was highly predictable. Between 2006 and 2020, we could have predicted the next year how many are likely to apply. Things obviously went a little bit awry in 2021 and 2022, and in 23 we thought it had kind of gone back to normal. But what we've seen now is a deviation from that previous increasing trend.
Right.
And what we're thinking is what it's looking like is, as Jo described, more of a plateau in demand. And what we need to stop and ask is Was it ever reasonable it would continue
Yes,
increasing
okay.
forever, or have we reached a plateau?
Yeah. Okay, so the whole journey to 1 million question mark is I guess it is a question mark as to whether we'll get there in anything like the original.
It was very
time
much
frame.
based on that very, very predictable pattern that we've seen.
And is there anything, and feel free to say no and move on, but anything we can indicate from or read from the demand from international students in your data? Obviously, lots of international students don't apply through UCAS. Lots of international students are postgrads or come via agents
absolutely.
or whatever. But nonetheless, the media are always very interested to read the UCAS data for trends in international demand as well. Is there anything worthwhile we can spot in that?
Absolutely. So the kind of things that we've seen have been, there have been certain markets that have been very strong for a number of years now. So we've seen growth in demand from Chinese students. Demand from India has kind of varied from time to time, but it's still looking, like, as you said, you have to kind of caveat it with the portion that UCAS sees, but it's been looking pretty buoyant this year.
Is any of that the Trump effect, do you think? Are we benefiting at all from people being put off from the US, or is it too early to?
We don't know. There wasn't a huge change between January and June,
Right.
and we might have seen a bigger change between January and June if that been the case.
And can I ask you about trends in other respects? So Jo's referred to some of these already, but I mean, for example, languages. I mean, there seems to be a slow but gradual balance towards STEM subjects, science, technology,
Yes.
engineering, mathematics, away from languages, which HEPI we've been doing a lot of work on, maybe
Yes.
away from some of the really old popular subjects of recent times, like psychology as well. I mean, what are we seeing?
Really interesting. So if we stick with the STEM bit to begin with, the story this year has been a kind of rebalancing of interest within STEM. So we've seen a decrease in applications to computing subjects and a kind of equal but opposite increase to interest in engineering subjects. So within the STEM picture itself, there's a little bit of a change. The language picture, as you describe, and obviously HEPI's done a lot of really interesting research in this field, it largely mirrors the kind of trends that we've seen in school leavers and the choices that they're making in terms of A-level. Can I take this opportunity to just talk a little bit technical about the application, about subject data? So when we and when HESA report the number of students by subject, we actually are talking about bits of students. And so if I'm about to do a course in, say, data science, it might be described as 80% statistics, which would go into mathematical sciences, and 20% AI, which would go into computing. And so when we see a decline in a subject area, that can actually be a decrease in the number of people going. It can also be the fact that a course has changed the proportion that's language.
And so if someone goes more cross-disciplinary or transdisciplinary, then it may have an impact.
So
Okay.
if you see 500 applications, that could actually be 2,000 students.
Yeah. Okay, that
But
makes
in terms of
yeah.
languages, there's definitely a there's a
There is
macro
a- there is
changing
a-
trend.
there is a
isn't there?
change, yeah.
Except for Spanish, I think
Apart
it
from-
gets
yes.
missed that actually Spanish is growing
Yes.
within that decline.
I mean, it's my personal view that, and I'm not speaking for UCAS, I'm not even speaking for HEPI, just my personal view that the collapse of language is one of the biggest problems we've seen in our school system in recent years. But perhaps an even bigger problem is boys falling behind girls or young men falling behind young women. And what will the gender or sex split look like in UCAS's numbers this year? Will we see a bigger gap?
It's been a very persistent problem. It's been a gap that has existed for a very long time. So the statistic that I found really surprising 10 years ago when I was previously at UCAS was that more 18-year-old girls get into higher education through UCAS than 18-year-old boys apply. And that gap has grown to, it's now about 5 percentage points, that difference. So it means that if every single 18-year-old boy who applies through UCAS gets a place, there are still fewer in number entering higher education. And it doesn't matter how you cut the data, if you cut it by background, by region, by anything apart from subject, you will always see
so
this
even
this
if university
difference.
took every young man applying,
There would still be a
have
gap.
completely cracked that problem.
Yeah.
Okay, keep the questions coming in. Continue upvoting questions, because I'm going to put a couple of questions to Ben, then we're going to move to the questions from the audience. So, Ben, I wanted to just touch again on the cost of living crisis. as I say, HEPI's put out a very big report with University of Loughborough and Technology One this morning on this issue, suggesting maintenance loan packages might only cover about 50% of the true costs of being a student if you're going to get properly involved in university life. And you've been doing thinking about this whole area as well. What's your take on the relationship between applicant behaviour and student cost of living?
So I think there's a couple of areas that we can focus on. So as Jo said, we speak to students on a regular basis. What they're telling us is they're adjusting their expectations of what higher education will be like. So they are thinking about studying part-time during their studies, and as a consequence that means they'll have less time to be social, also less time for extracurricular activities. We also know that financial support for students is a key consideration when selecting university now. It used to be a relatively low ranking consideration, now it's a top 3 consideration. Over the weekend there was some coverage about students that live at home during their studies or have that intent to live at home. If you go back a decade, around 1 in 5 students intended to live at home during their studies. 5 years ago it was 1 in 4, today it's around 1 in 3. So we've definitely seen more students looking to do that. I think it's important to reflect who those students are. So around half of IMD Quintile 1 students live at home during their studies.
Tell people what IMD Quintile 1 is.
Indices of multiple deprivation. I love an acronym, sorry. So half of IMD Quintile 1 students looking to live at home during their studies, compared to less than 1 in 5 of Quintile 5, so the least disadvantaged.
So we've talked to HEPI and written about what we call the bifurcation of the student experience, where if you come from an upper middle class background and your parents are willing to support you, you probably can still edit the student newspaper, can still join the rugby clubs, can still do some debating. Whereas if you're from a poorer background or you're not getting the parental support that is expected, and you maybe can't find a few hours of paid work on the side, you're having to do lots of paid work. It just changes the nature of the student experience. I mean, do we have a 2-tier student experience now?
I think your report about Advanced HE does touch upon some of the different experiences that we see. I think, as we say, IMD quintiles have different propensity to live at home. We also see regional differences as well. So students in Scotland, for example, are more likely to live at home during their studies. Students in London are more likely to live at home for, I think, fairly obvious reasons. And students in Wales tend to be more mobile. I think the key thing for me is that students have access to that information, advice and guidance around financial support. So students are definitely looking for that. It is a key consideration. And later this year, UCAS will be launching a scholarships and bursaries tool to help create greater visibility of those supports.
And a student and a cost of living while you study calculator.
Oh, great. Well, I look forward to hearing more about that. And Jo, I'm going to put one more question to you, and then we're going to go to the audience, which is, obviously, we've already talked a lot about how schools and colleges are the pipeline to higher education, so the choices you make as a young person. We are all waiting in the education sector for the post-16 review from the government. Some people call it a higher education white paper, some people call it a skills paper. Let's call it the post-16 review. Do you think that, you planning UCAS for change effectively on the back of that? Or this time last year, the government had been newly elected and we were all trying to work out what they were going to do, and this post-16 review might finally tell us. So are you spending a lot of time thinking about that?
Oh, we're definitely thinking about it and have been involved in some of the conversations. I think probably what I can say to you is, like everyone else, we'll be delighted to see it. I could tell you about my hopes and my fears for it, perhaps. So I think in terms of what I hope for, I'd really like to see more about access and participation plans, particularly from a regional angle, that regional disparity, which we bring to light through the constituency progression rate differences, I think is so fascinating. And
cold spots.
That London advantage, it's more people in all parts of the country should get to benefit from higher education. In terms of fears, I hope that student choice isn't removed. I think that's something that's just so integral to our system. Relates to your questions about clearing. I think the fact that students can choose to apply before they've got their results or after they have, is a really important thing of the UK system. Yeah,
great. Well, I'm going to move to, I've got a laptop here so I can read people's questions coming in. There's one about international students. The most upvoted one's actually around, I think I need to refresh. If you don't refresh it. Right, here we go. So Mike Larkins put a question in. He's a former academic from Northern Ireland, I believe. is UCAS concerned that many more students are opting for universities they can commute to from home? So we've talked about this a little bit, but of course the commuter student experience is different to the residential student experience. It may be perfectly fine, but it may limit your options. I mean,
should I start with this? I mean, just again, this is where I just think of it as a former school leader, and I obviously worked with hundreds of young people progressing to university every year, and in very many cases, studying local is absolutely the right thing for some students, whether that's because they've got caring responsibilities or part-time work, or just the course of their dreams is on their doorstep. And of course, so many universities do outreach work with their local school and college community. So I think it's wrong to perceive it as a less aspirational
but
choice.
it's a shame if you're doing it only because the student finance package isn't.
If the
giving you
finance
what you
package
need.
is the barrier, I agree with you.
Yeah.
That is the problem.
So Chris Parr, who's a journalist, the research professional, has got a question about mature student numbers, which have been falling over time. Can we expect that to continue? Maggie, this may be one for you, but do chip in on any other questions as well.
Well, it's not really technically mature. We obviously do see that pattern in mature we've seen for a little while, but for 19-year-olds we're seeing a very slight difference. So for a number of years we've seen a fall in the number of 19-year-olds who apply for the first time. We have to strip out the reappliers because they obviously vary in number based on how competitive it was to get in the previous year. But if we look at first-time 19-year-old appliers, they have actually stopped declining and in fact increased in number in the last 2 cycles. And this kind of tallies also with if we look at the number of 18-year-olds making a deferred entry application, that relative to population size has also been increasing, small but increasing, showing that I think people are taking their time to make the right choices for them and potentially taking some time in between.
So the next question links to that point, actually, from Rod Bristow, who's an experienced educationist and chair of Bradford University as well. And he's saying, given the plateauing in participation rates, the reasons why students select courses are perhaps more important than ever. What insight has UCAS got on that? Exactly, why students are choosing course A rather than course B?
We've been starting to do some polling and focus group with students about this, and I think the overwhelming reason that we're getting is, in effect, they see it as an investment in their future, in their career. Yeah. And I think that those findings are very different from the sorts of findings UCAS had, say, a decade ago. Yes. Yeah. I think the concept of I want to go and spend 3 years reading the texts that I absolutely love, like that's not what the UCAS cohort has front of mind at the moment. Did you add anything to that?
Yeah, no, I agree.
So there are good, politicians talk about all the time the labour market outcomes of degrees and which degrees give good labour market outcomes. And, I guess they'll have been doing similar focus groups which would have been telling them similar things. So I guess it's no surprise in some respects. James Seymour, who's an expert in admissions and has worked at many universities over time, has got a question about the number of people who register through the UCAS system, and you talked about this a bit at the HEPI annual conference, but then don't fully see through the application process. What can we do to entice those people who've shown initial interest in attending a higher education course and locking them in, if it's the right thing for them? What can we do to raise that?
Well, that's a key pillar in our new strategy, is to do something about that. I think we don't have all of the answers yet, but shining a light on, just that finding, we hope will begin to make a difference. We know about a third of those people are UK-based 18-year-olds, strong cohort of females in there, mature and international. But I think it's about UCAS working together with the sector on what it would like us to do to respond to that.
That's interesting that you said a large proportion of them are female, so it wouldn't help with the boys' challenge. Actually, it might make the gender gap even bigger.
So I think it's all caveated with, obviously we've stripped out the applications that aren't, we know that we're not looking at duplicates, all that sort of thing, but the findings are caveated with not all of the people before they apply tell us who they are. So these are headlines based on where we know who they are, and that's one of the things that we're working on is to know more about people prior to applying.
Thank you. Paul Woodgate, who is a former HEPI author as well as a consultant in the sector, has asked a question about the degree to which universities want to recruit international students or home students. So certainly in the recent past, international students looked particularly attractive sometimes, but not least because of the higher fees. But then they often only hang around for a year on a post-taught master's or something. There's been some media coverage this year arguing that actually the universities are more interested again in full-time 3-year home students as a secure bet. Have you any sense of how the admissions offices are making relative decisions between international and home students, or maybe it's different across the sector?
I think we don't see that other part of it. So obviously the postgraduate taught part we don't see in the data. It has always been the case that the acceptance rates, so the proportion of applicants who are successful through UCAS, has been lower for international students than for UK-based students. And obviously there have been some kind of changes post-Brexit with the number of EU students applying. So there are kind of some macro changes. I don't know if you know any more.
No, I would agree entirely. I think what we see in the international numbers this year is that continued global appeal of UK higher education, the way that institutions will be marrying up course numbers from UK to international students will differ across the sector, but we only see a partial picture in relation to the undergraduate students that come through UCAS, and obviously postgraduate is a much larger
also
market.
with an uncapped system outside of certain courses, universities have the freedom to admit.
So let's come on to that, because the next question's about that, which is there have been moments in our recent history where there have been sort of stability mechanisms and talked about and even lobbied for, whether that's an overall student number cap or whether it's sort of, when I was working in government, we had an AAB policy where you only had freedom to recruit at the very top level, A-level grades. There's so much sort of ruction, if that's a word, in the sector at the moment, things changing so rapidly, some institutions looking more financially at risk than others. Is it time for some sort of stability mechanism, or is that free-for-all that you just talked about, Jo, the right one?
Well, as I said earlier, I think student choice is incredibly important, and I wouldn't want anything that ended up being a cap on, in effect, the availability of places for students to study. That said, UCAS is working with UK and the wider, we'll continue to do so with wider sector on where we can, making sure that things like the admissions code are adhered to, so that admissions is fair for everybody, providers included.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I happen to personally agree with you about the importance of student choice, but it's interesting that, for example, Wonky's response to our report on student maintenance this morning was, well, if we can't afford to look after the students we've got properly, then maybe you do just have to accept fewer places in the system. So I think this debate might continue. But let's move on to the next question. Connie Dimsdale, a journalist, who has asked, if there is grade inflation, even if it's not huge this year, does that mean that there'll be fewer places in clearing because more people will have got their firm offer, and therefore actually there'll be less clearing activity, if you like, fewer people getting their place in clearing than in other recent years?
Well, I think that there's a lot of factors at play. So obviously we've already talked about the ability to use clearing to find something different, and if students find they've got results they didn't expect, they can look for some alternative in clearing as well. So the use of clearing is not so tightly linked to whether A-level results go up and down. And people apply with a whole range of other qualification types as well. It's important to remember that.
Yeah. And of course, results day is not only about A-levels, it's about other qualifications.
Absolutely. But I also think that, for me, when I'm talking about it's not too late to apply to university and media later this week, those are the people we really want to reach, the people who were earlier in our funnel and didn't make that application. And it's a key point in the year where everyone is talking about university on every TV channel, and whatever age you are, if you're thinking about it, you can do something about it that day.
Log on the UCAS website and make a decision.
I mean, I think broadly the number of courses available is relatively static over the last 5 years. It's always around
between 25 and 30,000, isn't it?
Yeah, so there's not a shortage of choice.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Can I ask about AI? now, you could answer this in almost any respect. There's a particular question here about AI, whether school pupils have used it, and therefore can the grades be trusted? I know there's less coursework in the system than there used to be, but nonetheless, there is some. There was a story in the media the other day about how Homer Simpson, someone had submitted a UCAS application from Homer Simpson, and 1 or 2 universities had taken that application seriously, and it was thought that maybe that was because they were using AI. There's also, you're about to roll out a new form of personal statement, which maybe people might try and game by using AI. How is AI changing what you do? Or how?
Okay, I'll start and see if colleagues want to add anything. I mean, first of all, there's a lot to unpack there. And I think the thing that I would say is that, you know, all of us, whatever our role in organisation, are having to learn to adapt to new technologies. I was sort of reminded of when I was a baby academic giving a lecture about the history of photography and how people at the time worried that it meant the death of art, but you know it didn't. So I mean, AI is such a significant change. We're in that sort of territory, aren't we? I think it's important to remember in the case of the application you refer to, UCAS cancelled that application, and fictional characters can't enrol at the university, and anyone enrolling at university has to provide proof of their qualifications. Can UCAS do more? Absolutely, and we'll be piloting some new approaches in the autumn.
Maggie, Ben, anything to add on AI? Sort of could affect every area of life, or maybe it's overrated.
It could definitely affect everything. It'll certainly give us pause.
Are you worried about people using it for personal statements?
Do you want me to talk about it? Yeah, just as a bit unfair because I've been here when all the research about the personal statement, and actually thank you to HEPI for sort of lobbying for that as a school leader. It's something that I always felt the open 4,000 character blank page was something that I saw was so overwhelming for many applicants. Obviously we did a lot of work on the 3 new questions, which have very much come from the admissions teams who've told us the things they want to know. But the fascinating finding we had was that applicants told us, you know, we gave them a range of theoretical scenarios. We said to them, even if universities didn't read these, is this something you would be prepared to do? And it was an overwhelming finding that they wanted to do it because for many it's the first time that they've had to write about themselves and the thing that they want to do. So I think we shouldn't lose in this the formative importance of the activity of the personal statement, and UCAS already has systems in place to report through to universities where we suspect plagiarism for them to investigate further. Okay,
so one to watch perhaps. Then one more question, and then I'm going to put a few forward-looking questions before we wind up at 1:45. Julia Rousel's asked, how might we see the gap between Russell Group and non-Russell Group universities change this year? There's been arguments, haven't there, in recent years about flight to the more traditional, more prestigious, perhaps, universities, which very often aren't the best route for every individual. But nonetheless, are the Russell Group going to grow relative to non-Russell Group?
Well, it's not something that we directly measure. We obviously report individual providers' outcomes at the end of the cycle. We do use a measure that's based on higher, medium and low tariff group. And we are reviewing that because we want to see if that we can enhance the way we describe groups of providers. But we have seen a continued in the pattern that we've seen over a number of years with more offer making, particularly to younger people from higher tariff providers. So when we see that pattern, we're also seeing applicants make more applications to higher tariff providers. So they're taking their up to 5 choices they can make, and they are kind of increasingly using the option to apply to higher tariff, so that will have that kind of impact. But it's a continuing trend, it's nothing new for this
And of course
year.
the government themselves have moved away when it comes to school accountability measures from Russell Group, non-Russell Group. They're slightly more close to what you do with your different tabs. So I'd like to ask, just before we end, 2 sort of bigger picture forward-looking questions. One about UCAS itself and one about the future of applicants. And the one about UCAS itself is, I read a lot of policy papers in higher education, and lots of them recommend the solution to whatever problem they're writing about is getting UCAS to do something. It might be having more granular information about earnings from different courses. It may be more granular information on cost of living. It may be doing more on apprenticeships, maybe, you know, or other vocational courses. Does that frustrate you, or should UCAS be expanding its, constantly sort of looking at its role in the sector?
Well, I'm probably still too new in role to. I'm not expansionist in my approach. Let's put it like that. I think the thing that I've arrived and felt was really, really important was that we get our essential service as good as we possibly can. So I've been focusing on some deeply unsexy under the bonnet things, but that should make a difference to university colleagues and ultimately to students getting that information they need in a timely way. For example, the work we do to plumb through qualification results to universities to try and get it to teams. Traditionally used to get it on a weekend. We've been getting it to them on a working day now, and we've been working to try and get it to them earlier in that working day. We still have work to do to sort of finesse that, but my focus is making sure that we get the core service as efficient as we possibly can.
Great, and then my final question, really to all of you, is, I mean, a baby being born today, are they going to face just a completely different educational experience, including when it comes to them enrolling in higher education, if that's what they do, than young people today? So I mean, it's partly about AI, it's partly about, you know, it's partly about how the labour market's changing, it's how university's changing. Or actually, will we recognise the traditional university experience in 18, 20 years' time? Will it, you know, is everything changing? Are we in a more rapidly changing environment than ever before, or is that overdone?
Possibly, but I think if you
went
went
overdone, or
either. I think, but if you went back 18 years and asked that same question of the people applying now, do we think that life and the way we live and the way university and the options for higher education, do they look the same now as they did 18 years ago? No, but yes, very strangely familiar. I think it's very similar to, I've recently returned to UCAS, and the building looks exactly the same, but you come inside and it's quite different. And I think it's the same with higher education. It constantly evolves.
Ben, do you agree?
I completely agree. I think there will always be a role for the traditional university model. I think what it looks like within those institutions will be different, the way things are taught, the content, etc. But I think there will always be a role for that traditional model. I think we will increasingly see more flexible routes as well for students as well. And the lifelong learning entitlement presents an opportunity to look at that. But I think there will always be a place for it, but it will look and feel different once you're there.
But just on the, can I just ask, but just on the lifelong, I will give you the final word, Jo, just on the lifelong learning entitlement. If I want to apply for a module through the lifelong learning entitlement, will I, do you think, be doing that through UCAS?
So I think there's a lot of thinking needed around the student journey in relation to the lifelong learning entitlement. I think it presents an opportunity to engage mature students in higher education. Those applicants are 4% down at this point in the cycle. And we look forward to working with the sector to really understand how we can make sure students are aware of those opportunities and pathways. Thank
you. I'm sure the ministers will be pleased to hear that. Sorry, Jo, to cut you off. Give you the final word.
I was just going to say, you know, obviously in the last 18 months, I've done a lot of university and college visits, and I think one of my overarching reflections is that, you know, there's still a perception, particularly amongst parents and carers, that university is a chalk and talk kind of a model, and that just isn't the case. And that's one of the reasons we have a lovely functionality on our website that gives you a kind of virtual experience of different courses. So I think, you know, university is already very different, and universities work so hard to ensure employability and career relevance. So I wish that was better understood.
And there's nothing to beat actually physically visiting a university, whether you're an applicant deciding where to apply or a policymaker who doesn't necessarily understand the diversity of the sector. So
I suppose in particular, I think one of the things, again, I'm coming back to thinking about how the sort of advice we used to give students when I was leading schools, but I think, you know, there's absolutely rightly been a huge effort to increase awareness around apprenticeship opportunities for young people. But I think we also have to make sure that we don't end up presenting a false dichotomy, because so many university opportunities. You know, there's not
Yeah.
a black and white line
Yeah.
between the two things.
Yeah, and of course there are still challenges on the supply of apprenticeships for school leavers. Some of the higher level apprenticeships going.
In some cases.
Yeah. So let's call to a halt there, because I think it's been incredibly illuminating. I'm incredibly grateful to the three of you for giving so much time out of your busiest week of the year to do this. I hope it's been useful. Do provide feedback on the session. I want to end by thanking, obviously, Jo, Maggie and Ben, and the tech team here at UCAS who've done an extraordinary job, and there's a huge professional team who just out of shot who have made sure this morning's gone smoothly. To my colleagues at HEPI, especially Emma Marr, who's also just out of shot and helped make today happen. And then finally, I think we should end by saying, if you are getting your results, or your children are getting your results this week, good luck. And also, if it doesn't quite work out, there are lots of opportunities available. So thank you very much, and we will put this recording up on YouTube if you want to watch it back, and do log on to the UCAS website for any more information, and indeed the HEPI website. Many thanks.